Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be continuing the Extra History series on Admiral Yi, which I'm very excited about. But before we get started, I do have to give a couple shout outs to the newest channel members. Thank you to Joe Schmo and Nanya7E. Thank you both for becoming channel members, and if any of you want to become a channel member, there's a link to do so in the description box below. Sometimes in the pinned comment. Depends if you beat me to the video or not. They don't let me put the comment there while it's on private, so some of you guys get there faster than I do, so that is what it is. Alright, now let's get into the main video. So today we're going to be doing part 4, Those Who Seek Death Shall Live. That's a very compelling title. I don't know exactly what that's going to mean in this context. Maybe it refers to recklessness. I don't know. Taking chances. That's what I hope it's going to be, but we'll find out. So I believe we have this one, and then there's one more, and then of course there's the lies episode. But there's this one and the next one. That's pretty much all we got left, and that makes me very excited about this one because I found that they have a lot of their most climactic stuff in the episode before last, because the last one has to kind of wrap everything up in a neat little bow. So I'd imagine a lot of the action as far as going into the climax here would be in this episode. So I'm excited. This should be a lot of fun. Let's get started.
Last time, we left Yi storming through the waters south of Korea, savaging the Japanese fleet wherever he went. He had driven them first to consolidate their forces to try to thwart him, and then, finally, to give up on offensive naval operations entirely, restricting their fleets to just defending the vital supplies coming in at Busan. Now it was in this last harbor that Yi would attack them. In the 2 months since the Battle of Angulpo, Yi had trained his men, reinforced his fleet, and tried to rationalize the structure of Korean Naval Command.
2 months, okay. I'm glad they're giving me like little reminders of the timing for these things, because honestly, the way it's presenting, the way it presents it feels like it's so compact. And it feels like this is happening over the course of an afternoon. Sometimes with this series, I wish they would give me more reminders of like what time we're in, because sometimes it's easy for me to get lost in that sort of stuff.
Now, on September 1st, 1592, he was ready to take on the combined Japanese armada at Busan. His fleet of 166 ships set out to destroy the nearly 500 Japanese ships awaiting them in Busan Bay. He caught a few stragglers along the way, but the Japanese had finally learned from their past encounters with him. They were holed up in the harbor now, and while Yi's ships were able to fire into the harbor from outside Japanese cannon range, he couldn't find an opening to get close enough to achieve the type of complete victory he craved. As long as the Japanese were in that harbor, they were protected by the surrounding troops and cannon on the shore. By the end of the day, Yi's fleet had destroyed 130 ships, and the Japanese hadn't sunk a single vessel, but the Japanese forces still held the all-important harbor of Busan. Yi had not been able to break their last line of supply. Now they'd be able to re-entrench and reinforce the harbor. As winter set...
Okay, I remember in the previous episode he talked a little bit about how he would try to cut off this supply line. So I'm glad he brought that back up, because I'm like, what are their means of getting supplies in at this point? It's just like that one option at this point. So this is incredibly desperate. I was thinking like, hey, Yi's got him on the ropes. Maybe he could like wait them out a little bit, but he doesn't have enough secured yet to play the waiting out game. So, okay.
Set in, and the campaign season slowed down. The situation on the ground changed as well. An army from China had finally arrived in the north, and by January they had driven the Japanese out of Pyongyang. All over the country, the Japanese started to fall back, unable to sustain their lengthy lines of supply due to Yi's bottling up of their navy. By April, Seoul was retaken as well, and Busan served as the last great Japanese stronghold, anchoring their control on southern Korea. By August, Yi was promoted to Supreme Commander of the Korean Army and moved his base to the island of Hansando, where he had previously used...
You're damn right he was. I was just thinking about this a second ago, because I know he got promoted, but I didn't really... He got promoted kind of early on in the series, but I kind of lost track of what his position actually was, so I didn't really understand to what extent he was like in charge of everything. He's clearly stood out, so it makes sense that he would be promoted to like top position, but I wasn't sure if he already was or not, because I don't really get military rank. I don't get it all that much. Sometimes it's very confusing. Whenever I have to write something involving military rank in like a paper, I have to look it up again and again and again just to make sure that I have the ranks understood, but it never really sticks, so yeah.
His crane wing formation to crush the Japanese offensive fleet. Again and again, Yi petitioned the court for Marines so that he could resume naval operations, because his fleet couldn't attack the Japanese so long as they stayed defended under their shore guns, and without Marines, he couldn't dislodge the shore batteries in order to follow up with the naval attack. But the Korean army was still in disarray at this point. Some of the most significant military gains on land were actually being made by guerrilla forces and the righteous armies of Buddhist monks. And what little of the regular army there was not already deployed on the main offensive with the Chinese?
The righteous armies of Buddhist monks. It just shows I know nothing about Buddhism. I understand that one thing I do know about Buddhism is that there's a lot of different kinds of Buddhism, so it's hard for me to put them in a box when I don't even really understand the fundamentals that well. But the armies of Buddhist monks, that's funny. And then they bring up gun monks in the Sengoku Jidai stuff, and I'm still laughing about that.
Was simply not up to the task Yi needed. And so his fleet sat, patrolled the waters, and kept the Japanese from breaking out of Busan. They would not get to engage in another major battle for some time. So instead, Yi focused on turning his island base into a production center. With the country ravaged by war and most of the working-age men conscripted into the army or the navy, the central government couldn't provide Yi's forces with the food, lumber, or weapons he needed to keep his men fed and his fleet in top shape. So he invited refugees to come to his island. He would protect them if they would work the land. At first they were just producing grain, but soon they were harvesting salt and timber. Then the production facilities grew to handle boat building and uniform manufacturing. Soon there was a full-fledged R&D wing on the island, and great...
I like this. This is really clever, because this is the extra element of war that's not nearly as exciting to most people, but I think deserves a lot of attention. Like the people who are providing the resources for the people doing the fighting. So I'm actually really glad that it's putting a little bit of emphasis on this. I don't know if this is as exciting to other people as it is to me, but this is more what excites me than just the battle stuff. Battle's cool, whatever, but I kind of like the how-tos of war. It's kind of fun.
They were harvesting salt and timber. Then the production facilities grew to handle boat building and uniform manufacturing. Soon there was a full-fledged R&D wing on the island, and great forges to produce goods of iron. The first truly successful Korean muskets were forged here by Yi's research team. But as Yi was making his navy self-sufficient, the land war in Korea slowly ground to a stalemate.
I mean, how much could the muskets be worth right now? I mean, if they're so not used to it, like it's probably going to have a little bit of a learning curve, right? I would imagine they're not ready to use the muskets on like a full scale. They don't have a lot of people trained in that sort of thing. So it's cool that they're getting it, but I can't imagine that it's got to take some time before you can get people who can like effectively use something like that when you implement new technology like that.
And peace talks began. The talks wore on for 3.5 years, until in September 1596, negotiations broke down, and Hideyoshi prepared a second invading force of 141,500 men to head to the shores of Korea. As this new invasion force was setting sail, the Korean court received a letter from one of the Japanese commanders, in which he appeared to be selling out one of his counterparts, telling the Koreans exactly where his hated rival's fleet would be sailing, and suggesting that if only Admiral Yi Sun-shin would sail there, he could wipe them out and do everybody a favor.
So I was about to say, like, this totally sounds like a trap, but, like, I was, like, a frame late for making that prediction because it seems like Yi already saw through that portion.
Admiral Yi heard this and laughed. Yeah, nice try. He refused the order to sail his fleet into an obvious Japanese trap. But Yi's childhood friend, Ryu Sung-young, had enemies in court, and when they heard of Yi's refusal to follow orders, they seized on this opportunity and had Yi tried for treason. Ryu could do nothing to save him. Yi was ordered to return to Seoul.
Are they freaking dumb? Like, I mean, clearly they're cynical at this point. There's no way that they are genuinely making this argument. Clearly, it's coming from a cynical place. So me asking if they're dumb, it's probably the exact opposite. They're looking for probably personal advancement by stepping on other people.
For his punishment, his replacement as head of the Navy would be Won Kyun. This was the guy who'd sat and done nothing when the Japanese ships first invaded, and then promptly scuttled his own fleet. A fleet 4 times as large as the one Yi had been using to inflict such heavy losses on their enemies. Yi was nearly sentenced to death for his insubordination, but there were still those in court who saw his value, and though they couldn't save him entirely, they did save his life. He was once more reduced to the rank of a common soldier and sent off to fight with one of the armies.
Oh man, I thought we were done with this. I've commented on how circular his career is, and I thought it was over. I thought it was over in one of the previous ones, but no, we got a little bit more of this.
But not long after he arrived at the army, the Japanese tried the same trick again. They sent the court a letter, this time informing them of a large transport fleet that was on its way, and saying how easy it would be to pick off these transports if they hurried. Won Kyun was ordered to intercept this juicy target, and he immediately set sail with every ship Yi had built. But when he reached the waters near Busan, he was shocked to find not an unarmed transport convoy, but a massive war fleet of 500 ships. Despite this and the exhaustion...
I mean, yeah. Are you... now that I... Come here, bud. You want to come here? Now that we've actually seen this portion, now that we've seen somebody kind of just walk straight into the trap, now I'm starting to think that they are just freaking dumb. And they're not just trying to get rid of Yi, and they are actually just really, really gullible.
His men faced from traveling so quickly, Won Kyun ordered a head-on assault. The winds picked up, and a gale began to form. Won Kyun couldn't keep his fleet together. Soon, some 30 Korean ships were burning, having drifted close enough to the enemy that, for the first time in the war, the Japanese could deploy their preferred form of naval warfare, boarding parties.
Tell me it's going to be like, oh, Yi, we were so sorry. You knew exactly what you were doing. Usually life isn't that convenient, but I'm hoping that we actually get something. Like, this should theoretically redeem him, but we have seen in the past that even just being accused of stuff, when it comes to, like, insubordination or, like, potential treason or whatever, like, just being accused of it can, like, totally destroy his reputation and keep him from being completely redeemed. So I'd imagine if they bring him back up, I'm assuming they're not going to bring him back up to the position he was at, but maybe he'll be a little bit more than what he is now.
Panic, Won Kyun ordered a retreat and fled to the island of Kadokdo, where he ordered his men off the ships to resupply. What he hadn't realized was that this island was under Japanese control. As his men searched for fresh water, they were set upon by the Japanese island garrison and slaughtered. Those who escaped fled back to the ships without any of the supplies they desperately needed. Then the fleet just sat there, deflated and listless.
Yi wouldn't have done that. Yi would have done the right thing. This is actually, like... for some reason, it's reminding me of, like, those "What would Jesus do" bracelets that people used to have. And I'm just thinking, like, what would Yi do right now? And like, this is frustrating. This is actually frustrating to watch.
Commanders asked for orders, but Won Kyun had none. Though Busan itself was not far away, he didn't even send out scouts or reposition his fleet. Then, on the night of July 15th, guided by a full moon, the Japanese struck. Won Kyun's forces were in a disadvantageous position. His men were fatigued from lack of supply and demoralized by their loss and the days of waiting. Caught off guard at night and without any sort of plan, they were no match for the organized and coordinated Japanese assault. Even abandoning ship couldn't save them, as those that made it to one of the nearby shores found themselves face to face with the Japanese army, who were silently waiting there for any stragglers who might try to escape, and were quickly cut down. Of the fleet Yi had so carefully built, only 12 ships escaped, saved by one of the sub-commanders who had tried to warn Won Kyun of the danger they faced. 157 Korean ships were lost that day, including every turtle ship ever built. So with only 12 ships left in the
No, not the turtle ship. I was told that those could not be beaten. So, okay. It's kind of a shame I don't get to see how they did it. That's one of those things. That's been the big question. How are they going to beat the turtle ships? But apparently they figured it out, and I guess it wasn't worth mentioning how.
entire navy. Who did Korea call upon? Who else? But mere days after reinstating Yi as admiral, the court informed him that they were disbanding the navy. Yi responded thusly: "This humble subject still has 12 ships. However small the number may be, I solemnly swear I will be able to defend the sea if I prepare myself for death to resist the enemy." And so they let him. So Yi plotted and pondered where he would make his last stand. This would be it. This one decision would seal the fate of Korea. He studied charts and tides, and finally came to decide on Myeongyang, the Roaring Strait. This particular strait had a strong current, but unknown to the Japanese, its current had a strange property. Every 3 hours, it changed direction. It was upon this unusual current that Yi would gamble everything. On September 16th, the Japanese fleet, looking to destroy the final remnant of the Korean Navy, found Yi's scouts at the mouth of the strait. They chased the scouts into the strait, and that's when Yi fell upon them. Yi's flagship dashed into their midst, roaring cannon and tearing through Japanese timber. But his ship fought alone. The rest of his navy, possessed by fear at facing such a large force, had lagged behind. Eventually, though, seeing the havoc Yi's ship was wreaking on the enemy, they took heart. Messengers were sent from...
Okay, so now this is the conflict probably from the first episode, right? When it opened up with like just the music playing, the devastated ships or whatever. I believe that's where we are now. But I guess that opening didn't really give me an indication as to who was on the side that was suffering. Honestly, I don't know what's going to happen with this because I don't know what Yi's personal fate is. Like, I know the general outcome of the conflict, but I don't personally understand what happened to Yi going forward. So that's the real mystery here.
From boat to boat with a mix of inspirational words, threats, and the hope of victory. And soon, the rest of Yi's tiny armada dove into the fray. Then, a stroke of luck. The enemy flagship was blown apart by friendly fire, and the Japanese began to waver. Some of their ships began to turn about to fall back. And it was just at this moment that the water's current turned. The strait was too narrow for all the Japanese ships to maneuver around each other, and with the current roaring against them, ship slammed into ship. They tried in vain to retreat, tangled, ships smashing into one another, screams and chaos, and over it all, the roaring water. With the current now on their side, the Koreans gave chase, laying into enemy ships on either side, a hail of fire and arrows. The Japanese boats burnt and sank. 133 vessels had come to...
I think that was one of the shots from
the Japanese boat.
I think that is one of the shots from the first episode. So that would be this, I think.
Boats burnt and sank. 133 vessels had come to crush this tiny remnant of Korean Navy, and 31 of them wouldn't be returning. Yi, even when facing odds of 10 to 1, had once again not lost a single ship. Word of Yi's victory spread. As his tiny fleet sailed, one by one, other ships began to show up. Ships that had been thought lost. Ships that had been hiding after the previous disaster under Woncheon. These ships now came to join Yi's tiny armada. Refugees flocked to where Yi's ships were anchored, willingly giving him food, cloth, and iron. And perhaps most importantly, the Chinese, who had mostly limited their naval efforts to guarding ports until now, decided that they could work with the Korean Navy and take the offensive. And so we'll leave Yi rebuilding the Korean Navy until next week, when we see the Japanese invasion ended for good.
We'll leave Yi. Doing that, some of that old English stuff right there. I know that's not what they mean, but that was really cool. So I guess this wasn't really the climax, was it? I thought it was, but I guess we're actually going to be getting the climax in what is the last episode, assuming the next one is the last episode. I believe it is. All right, that was really cool. So I'll probably be back tomorrow with the conclusion. What's up, dude? You mad? I don't know. He's got words for me. So I'll be back with the conclusion tomorrow. So tune in at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll figure out what happens to Yi and his mate, Fee. Thanks for watching.